Evening, everybody. It's been a while. I hope everyone's summer is going well. Mine certainly is. Got a lot of housework done. What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. It's all right. So I hope everybody else's summer is going well. I haven't had a chance to talk to my colleagues recently, but I'm hoping and praying that everybody's getting a lot of stuff done that you've not been able to get done. I also must say the reprieve that we've had has been good. It has allowed a lot of folks to get work done at central office, in our school buildings, and in our own offices. Most of us, I think all of us, as board members, maintain separate jobs and occupations. So we realize there's great work to be done in our district, but there is a community that needs and wants the services of board members who have other equally important jobs. So I got to be honest, on behalf of my colleagues, it has been good to be able to service people beyond the school district because the needs are great and they begin long before our children enter into the schoolhouse. So we are happy about that. But I'm glad, as I know my colleagues are, to be back in the company of folks who service children and service them well and exclusively. So without further ado, I'm calling this meeting to order. Again, today is July 21st. It's now 7:34. And we have no speakers, as I am told. Is that right, Madam Clerk?
That is correct, President White.
All right, so we'll skip to the next item in the agenda. There are, on occasion, at these special meetings, special topics. And one of the topics that we need to address, and I hope I'm not catching Anissa Henry Wheeler off guard, is the discussion of the comptrollers, our response to the comptrollers report. Anissa, are you there? I see your name, but I don't see your face. Oh, there you are. How are you, Anissa?
You're on the agenda, so I'm trying to look.
Are you prepared to, and I know Leslie is there, are you prepared to sort of give the community, and more importantly, at this time, the Board of Education, a brief summary of where we're at in terms of our response to the comptroller's latest report?
Certainly. The cap that I've provided that the board has received is not associated with the June 5th report, which is the last letter we received from the comptroller. We have received 3 communications from the comptroller. And actually, I spent a considerable amount of time today trying to understand the various documents that we've received to date. The first letter that we received was basically a state of affairs and their estimate of where we stood, where we had the challenges as of year end last year. That was their first document, and that was their best estimate of where we stood. The second report, which was an April 22nd item, the April report appeared to be an actual. For that report, we're required to both provide a response as well as a corrective action plan. What I submitted to you is the corrective action plan to 3 items, which is really asking the board to establish a structurally sound budget, as well as ensure that we're using relevant estimates for that, to ensure we have a plan to get out of our fund balance deficit position. And the last item that they are looking for is to ensure we have a long-term fiscal plan. 2 of those items are things that we have effectively working on. The first item, of course, is having a sound budget. We had an excellent budget deliberation process for 2021. Considerable work and effort was expended by the board, thoroughly evaluating things and administration, making cuts as necessary. And in the letter received on June 5th, we see that the comptroller commended us for the efforts in that area. So we just need to continue to do that. That would be the first item. The second being establishing a plan for fund balance. We recognize with the COVID-19 shutdown that actually is starting in the right path and footway towards us restoring our fund balance. It'll take a little bit of time, and we have a lot of contingencies right now to make that happen. I did speak with interim CFO Pierce as well as Dr. Jallo, as we discussed. And right now we'll establish the plan, but we recognize that it'll take a few years to ensure we can get to at least the 5% minimum that is the expected fund balance levels. We aspire to have more than that, but certainly that is going to take a little time, especially with so many uncertainties. The last item is the fiscal plan. In the legislation and in the direction that has been given to us as we receive the state monitor and the work that Dr. Jowell is doing with us, that is something that we're actively working on. And so likewise, that is included. We expect all of these items to have significant work and have some completion by December 31st. I can't hear you, Van.
Sorry about that. Leslie, are you there?
Yes.
Did you want to add anything to that?
I think the key piece around this is that first one, as far as making sure that we have sound practices. And I just want to share with the community that we are actively working. I'm actively working with not only our CFO, but as well as our executive cabinet to make sure that we are modeling practices that are fiscally sound, that we're reviewing all items that come across for consideration, and that's just really critically important. It's also important to share that we'll begin the budget process for 21-22. That's weird to say that, but 21-22, and really make sure that we have good amount of time to collaborate, to talk through, and work very transparently both with the board and the community. So that's all I want to share at this time.
Thank you. Dr. Jallo, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know obviously you have a great degree of interest in this subject. Did you want to comment at all?
I really don't have, good evening, everyone. I really don't have anything new to add to what Anissa has shared and what Dr. Smalls has shared. We have begun working on addressing each of those 3 points that Luke mentioned or highlighted in the letter. So I feel very confident about the letter moving forward and reflecting the work that we're doing presently.
Thank you. On behalf of the entire board, I want to thank Anissa and everybody who's contributed to that work product. It was not easy, as she indicated, to get to the present budget that we have. That is a step at least in the right direction, but the real critical, difficult work is making sure we complete that journey. And we rely heavily on Anissa, Dr. Jallo, of course. Your support and recommendations will be helpful. And none of this could happen without our new superintendent and Carlene, who the board is additionally grateful that she has stepped over from East EPO to assist us in this effort. So does any board member have any questions, comments, or concerns regarding the letter? I understand, and this, you correct me if I'm wrong, this needs to go out tomorrow or today?
I'm hoping to send it out tonight, yes.
Are there any questions or comments for Anissa? I'm pulling up my participant list. I see Vice President Elliott has raised her hand.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. You know, we've, over the years I've been on this board, we've always had great plans. The issue has been is that we have not had the leadership in order to implement those plans, or the superintendents in the past have not gotten the right information from the either her executive staff or other people. And so I just want to make sure that there is follow through on this because I believe that is where drop that the leadership did not follow through on what we had put in the plan. It did not get operationalized, and that's why we have the state monitor here, because we didn't do our due diligence about following through on that. And so I'm hoping Dr. Myers-Smalls that and Dr. Jallo, that we are really looking into the details and that the district is following through. That's always where we dropped this, always where we dropped it. We didn't do what we said we were going to do in our plans. So there are millions of plans that are around the district that did not get operationalized for whatever reason. To me, it was like we didn't have the appropriate leadership in order to ensure that those plans got operationalized. And again, if we had, we would not be where we are today. Thank you.
I don't see anybody else's hand being raised. So is there any, Carl, are you there? I don't believe the question is to Carl or Steve. I don't believe we need to take a formal vote. I just need to make sure that there are no objections to the letter as currently drafted. And as I don't see any or hear any, as I don't see Carl or Steve telling me we absolutely need a resolution, because I don't believe we do, to send out such a letter. I think, Anissa, you have the permission that you need to proceed and send that letter forward, okay?
Yes, thank you.
No,
Mr.
thank you.
President, I suggest that the minutes simply reflect that you put the question before the board and there was no objection.
I think the minutes can reflect that, won't they, Madam Clerk?
They
Because
sure will.
I did ask if there was any objections and I didn't hear any. So thank you, Carl. All right, let's move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the Finance Committee. Turn the gavel over to Commissioner LeBron.
Thanks, President White. So I want to call to a vote now or a motion for the minutes for the June 9th Financial Committee of the Whole meeting. Everybody had a chance to review them. If somebody can motion those.
Motion.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Minutes pass. And then will be turning over the gavel, well, the mic over to our interim CFO, Ms. Pierce.
Good evening. It's an absolute honor to serve in this capacity this evening as interim CFO as well as the CFO for the East DPO. And I'm very happy to present the month ended June 30, 2020 financial statements to you. Before I begin, I want you to know that the intent of this evening is to totally and completely be transparent with regard to the information being shared. If I say something that isn't clear or use terminology that's unfamiliar, please just stop me because transparency starts with very clear communication. Please note that I did state I'm reporting on the financial status as of the month ended June 30th, 2020. And that's because of the fact that the books have not yet officially been closed for the year. So with that said, you'll find a disclaimer in the notes section of the financial report in the very top. It would be the second paragraph down, stating that as of this evening, I can tell you with 100% certainty that the financial statements will change between now and the end of the year. So tonight, instead of going through the report as typical section by section, I would actually like to draw your attention to the addendum that I prepared for you. If you will, it's a Reader's Digest version of the financial statements, but it's going to bring the most relevant facts to your attention quickly. So with that, I would like to start with the aggregate cash flow report, and that is actually going to be on page 2 of 20, Kalia, and we'll get started there. So again, with the addendum, I don't know if you've had a chance to read that ahead of time or not, but as we go through the cash flow report, these are the things that I would like to raise to the attention of not only the commissioners, but to our public at large. And that's to take a look at the year-over-year standing within the cash flow. The bottom line will show for, and this is in the top section of that report, if you go way over to the right-hand side in the top section where it says actual, you're going to see a bottom line figure of 107 million and change. That looks mighty impressive compared to where we were a year ago at 63 million. And I just want to say that what we need to look at is the entire story behind that figure. And what we need to be aware of and remember is that 35 million of that 107 was the spin up. We also had an additional 10 million in spin up. And then we finally have a contractual payment that has not yet been paid out in excess of 22 million. It's actually over 23 million at this point in time that has not been paid out. And that's because services have not yet been rendered under those contracts. So what you're looking at is a one-time cash inflow, if you will, or adjustments that are not typical. So yes, we are absolutely at a higher cash flow level than where we were a year ago at this time. But please understand that it's as a result of one-time cash inflows into the district. The next section I'd like to take you down to, if there are any questions, again, just jump in at any time. I'm happy to address those with you. The next section I'd like to bring to your attention is the revenue summary report, which is on page 3 of 20 of your packet. And again, it's a preference to be looking at these reports in trend analysis, meaning year over year, what does it look like versus just 1 year at a time or 1 month at a time. And that is something that I promise you that a change will be made moving forward, because it just gives you, again, a picture of what the history has been. So in this particular case, when you look at the far right-hand side, the variance from the amended budget, this is absolutely how that far right-hand column is being calculated, meaning that when you take the column that's entitled Revenue Received as of 6/30/2020, that's again a snapshot as of 6/30/2020, what was received by the district. What has actually been done here is that it is comparing that to the 2019-2020 amended budget. Now, most districts will actually take the revenue received and compare it to the adopted budget to show a variance. But in this particular case, I absolutely agree with what has been done and how it's been presented, because of the fact of all of the inflows that I just referenced previously, with the $35 million spin up as well as the $10 million spin up, which did have a significant impact to our revenue summary. So again, going forward, we'll be taking a look at trend analysis, what's happened year over year, what our revenue is showing us. The other thing that we need to be aware of, and if Callie, if you could please flip it one more page, please, and go down to the bottom of the page. Thank you. The very bottom line is a little daunting, and that's showing that we are actually having, if you go down one more page, it's page 4, yep. Very bottom line. You're going to see that it's showing that we have a variance in excess of $85 million in compared to what was actually received versus what was amended and expected to receive. Now, please keep in mind that our school district does things a little bit differently than other school districts. This has been brought up on many occasions. But in this particular case, with regard to revenue, what's happening here is that this is accumulation of all of our funds, which is pretty unusual to view the financials that way. So Callie, if I could please bother you to move back to page 3 of 20, and we're going to move to the line that says the general fund. Let's see here. If you, let's see, go down a little bit more. A little bit more. It's hard when you're not controlling this. A little bit more. It's actually going to say general fund total. I guess it was on page 4 of 20. When you're looking at, right there, perfect. When you're looking at just the general fund, it's important to bring to your attention, in that particular case, it's showing a difference or a variance of a negative 23 million. I will share with you that this report, again, is as of 6/30/2020. And we actually, as has been consistent recently with the monies that we're receiving from the state and federal government, the money did actually come in from the state on 7/1. So that's pretty much going to show a break even for the general fund. The special aid fund, or the grant fund, which is the one right below it, is going to show a greater variance. And what that is reflecting the fact that the special aid fund actually closes out after the general fund. So where we have a 6/30 closeout for the general fund, the special aid fund will actually continue to bring money in pretty much right up until August 31st. It all depends on what grant money that we are still expecting. Similar, the food service fund is showing a variance there as well. We knew we would have a variance, but all I can say is that at this particular point in time, we know that the numbers will be changing, so we can make our year-end adjustments. And that's really the most important thing to take away from this revenue summary this evening, is that the numbers will be changing, and we're expecting it to be showing an improvement for the closeout of the year-end. The appropriation status report, again, equally as important. I know that much time is always focused in on the appropriation. It's equally as important as the revenue status. So we have to look at both sides of the budget continually. What are our revenues doing and what are our expenditures doing? Because the two are married and they go together. We have to look at the entire big picture. So again, those numbers will be closed out, adjustments will be made, and you'll have a much better picture by, I think, pretty much by August timeframe is when we're scheduled to close out the books. The last item that I would like to bring to your attention this evening is actually page 16 of 20. And that's where we start looking at the H fund and the K fund. And the H fund and the K fund really represent what is actually happening within our capital funds with regard to our projects that we're working on, our renovations that we're working on. And what became evidently clear is that we need to do a little bit of work when we're talking about transparency with regard to these reports. Because even if you take a look at your package that you will be approving this coming Thursday at the board meeting, what I was trying to do was tie back into those resolutions, tying it back into these documents. And just looking at it as someone either having brand new eyes on the funds, or maybe perhaps not totally and completely understanding the funds and how they operate and what all the numbers represent, it became pretty clear that we need to further identify the codes for you and what is actually housed in those codes and the expenditures running through them. So again, in a future meeting, as part of the presentation, we'll actually be taking you through the K fund and the H fund, and we'll be matching those funds against the capital improvement plan, just so that everything is in alignment and that you as commissioners, collectively as a board, are feeling comfortable about what you're approving and how you're approving the items moving through the resolutions with regard to our capital projects. So there's more to come on that. That really concludes the first portion of the financial report. And if you have any questions, I am very happy to go over those questions with you. If not,
Dr. Jallo?
Yes. Thank you, Carlene. I want to ask for the board members so that they're clear. What are the 4 big takeaways you want the board to know and understand based on this presentation? What are the 4 things that they should absolutely know and consider moving forward?
and you'd like me to answer that, you said, correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I would like them to understand the importance of trend analysis. So that is looking at year-over-year numbers. We're not just looking at a snapshot as of today. Trend analysis is very important with regard to our health as a school district and as a going entity. I would like you to also understand the numbers will be changing. What we have is a snapshot as of June 30th, 2020. We know that we have closing entries that need to be made. And so we know that these numbers will be changing. I would like you to feel free to ask questions because it's absolutely imperative that when you are reviewing the resolutions that are being brought forward to you, there is no harm at all in reaching out to myself or whomever may be presenting the resolutions or going directly to Dr. Meyer-Small or Dr. Nelms and just saying, I'm not understanding this. Because I can appreciate what you're looking at, because sometimes we need to change the way that we are delivering the information to you. So again, in an effort to be totally and completely transparent, it could come down to simply, how do I better communicate? How do I share the information? How do I use terminology that is understood by everyone? So again, please don't feel afraid or ashamed or anything of asking questions or asking for clarifications. That's our job, and that's what we're here to do. We are here to serve you in the community and make sure that we get through all this together. Anything else? Okay. Kalia, could we go to...
I'm sorry, Ms. Pierce. Commissioner Adams raised his hand.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Oh, so I didn't know if you were complete. I just wanted to thank you for letting us know that you're going to give us some information about these codes, because that's been an issue for me, knowing what them codes mean. So thank you for that.
I've been listening to you. I can understand.
Okay, I think that's it. Go ahead, Carlene.
Okay, the next item down, Kalia, is going to be our fund balance report. And so I know that in listening to past financial to produce the fund balance prior to the end of the year. And what it became, again, clear to me was that as simple as communication could be, there was a difference in terminology of how fund balance was being defined. So tonight, there's this is a document that was actually prepared by the New York State Association of School Business Officials. So I'm using their materials, and I'm hoping that you can use this as a document as we move through time together to say, how did she get to this number again? So again, it's a tool, and as we move through it, Callie, if you don't mind going to the next slide, why do we need to understand what fund balance is and why we have to be paying attention to it? And it's really so that we are best prepared to understand what is driving our program, so that Dr. Myers-Small and Dr. Nelms can say, I understand what money we're going to have available. If we are ever fortunate enough, and when we will be fortunate enough to actually have money to put into reserves, what will those reserves be? How will we fund them? And how much money will we be giving back to our taxpayers, so to speak, through the usage of appropriated fund balance? So what will we be using of our savings to offset future expenditures? The risk of not producing a fund balance or giving an absolute dollar amount out to the public is that there becomes a loss of trust. It could be trust between the superintendent and the CFO, trust between the superintendent and the community, the board. I know that you've been facing this in the conversations we've been having over the last months, years, and again, it's just to build a foundation of trust that is built on transparency. So, Callie, again, if you could go forward. When do we start projecting fund balance? Typically, it's the norm that we can start projecting fund balance, actually, believe it or not, in January. So, pretty much the books are, if you think about it, school, if we were in a normal year, school would be back in session in September, and all the supplies should be delivered to the schools. They'll be ready for the children to use. And so after that, really any expenditures that come afterwards are expenditures that are above and beyond in some cases, because we should be encumbering our funds. We should be managing those funds. And so come the time of January, we're at a point we can say we understand what our salaries are going to look at like from a projection forward. We understand what the remaining contracts we have. And so we're really looking at being able to provide a number at that point as far as what the fund balance would be. So again, Kelly, again, if you can go forward, how do you calculate fund balance and how is it defined? I like to use the analogies that bring us closer to home. So when you're thinking about your own personal budget, if you think about your checking account that's out there, and then to your checking account, you're going to actually add your paycheck coming into the checking account. Then you're going to take out your expenditures, so any bills that you have to pay. And so that then becomes your ending fund balance. It's the money left over. And Callie, again, if you could go one more page further. So if you think about it, again, it's your savings account, if you want to put it in that kind of a frame of mind. It's as simple as that. So you take that savings account balance and you're thinking, okay, what else do I know that I can't spend? What other expenditures am I aware of that sit out there or could be lurking out there that I need to take into consideration? What other projects do I want to put aside money for, as far as that I want to take care of my own, you know, if it's in this case of a school district, it could be a bus reserve, it could be, you know, money put aside for, you know, litigation, anything like that, anything that we know that we want to put money aside for, we take that away from that savings account balance. And in the very end, that's what's left over. That is your unassigned fund balance, or your unassigned savings, if you will, that you can use for other purposes. So when we take a look at it, and again, my hat is off to Brian Pack, the director of our budget, and also to Carrie Couples, the director of accounting, because I think they were very nervous about saying, well, how do we do this? This isn't how we've done it before. They actually came together as a team with their other colleagues, and they were able to provide you this evening as an absolute deliverable to you, a projected fund balance as of June 30th, 2020. So kudos to them for doing that. Again, this is new and different for them, but this will be our practice moving forward, that in starting every January, you will have a number delivered to you so we can start using that to plan from. Our policy, where you see the 42.7 million as a projection, again, only a projection, it's not absolute, and it's first time through. 5%, a minimum of 5%, and up to 15% aside into the savings called fund balance. The 5% would actually be 46.4 million. So we're a little bit short. But then we have to take into consideration, again, those contractual payments that I mentioned earlier. They have creeped up to $23.5 million that we have withheld, and we're making a decision as to whether or not that obligation will be paid. At this point in time, it's for services not yet rendered. So we're saying if we have to go ahead and pay that, then that would be deducted from that projected amount. We also had agreed that we would be putting aside money for the restoration of unassigned fund balance within the budget. And in the year 1920, that amount was actually $8.9 million. So again, you take that out of the adjusted fund balance projections, money that's already accounted for that we know we wanted to put aside. And then for the new challenges for 2021, we already are aware that we have, actually, Kelly, if you could go back one, we are aware that we have underestimated our BOCES expenditure by $3 million at this point in time. And we also are very aware that we have underestimated our charter school expense possibly by $1.5 million. And I'll get into that a little bit later in our presentation. We are aware as well that there may be a reduction or deferment in state aid. We don't know the dollar amount yet. We don't know the impact, so that is an unknown to us. But we have to be prepared should that come to absolute fruition. And lastly, as we're all so well aware of, we do know that we will have COVID-19 expenditures to contend with. We just do not have that dollar amount. So again, Kelly, if you could go forward, that would be great. How are we going to overcome our financial crisis? And truly, some people may feel crisis is too strong of a word. It truly isn't. Right now, we are in a dire state, and we do plan on overcoming and rising above. And how are we going to do that? The greatest way that we're going to do that is to discipline our spending, looking at our spending habits. Again, if you think back to a personal budget or even your business budget, there's times where you have wants and there's times that you only can satisfy the needs. And this is a time in our journey together where we will be looking at the needs versus the wants. We will be implementing a budget freeze, which we'll be talking about shortly. We will be right-sizing our staff according to enrollment. We'll be looking at more shared services. And also, you'll have a presentation this evening on the proper management of substitutes, which was an area that became very clear that we needed to spend more time on. So Callie, if you could go forward now into the cash flow. And if there's any questions regarding fund balance or the calculation, I would be happy to go through that with you. Okay. So let's take a look at one of the items that I raised with the fund balance as a known for our 2021 journey together is going to be the possible reduction and or deferment of state aid. And some of these slides this evening, I apologize in advance, they're a little bit small, but Kelly is going to be bringing up the cash flow showing a 3% reduction in state aid.
Carlene, before as she's putting that up, Commissioner Vice President Elliott has a question.
Absolutely.
I always get somewhat confused, and I need to learn the difference between the unrestricted fund balance and the contingency line that's in our budget. Can you explain to me the difference between the two, Carlene?
Well, I hope I can. The unrestricted, it's my understanding that this is a brand new line that was agreed upon by the auditors as well as by the central office financial team. And so, if you will, there are funds built within the budget. In a typical budget, they would say, okay, we're thinking that the expense is this, but it could be that. You know, you take utilities, for instance, as a line item. You don't really know what that's going to be. When you're looking at your expenditures, it's better to overestimate your expenditures and underestimate your revenue. So where you're, and again, I think that this is a great topic. I know you're going to be asked to complete a survey for professional development opportunities. This is a great one to take a look at. The auditors have absolutely allowed us to place a line item within our budget that will allow us to identify the dollar amount we're holding aside to help us restore fund balance into the RCSD budget. And that's now what you're seeing as that line that is there to restore fund balance. So in 1920, that dollar amount was $8.9 million. In the 2021 budget, that line item is $8 million. previous budget, that line has now been removed. The contingency line was for the what ifs. What happens if I overexpend or if I didn't plan right? It would draw from that that line. This is very different because we're holding on to that 8.9 or the 8 million this year with both fists and saying we're not letting go. We're not letting anybody touch this money. It's going to be the last ditch effort before we dip into this particular line item. We need to hold firm to this line that that money absolutely will go towards our fiscal and financial health and the well-being of our financial status. So that's the difference, Commissioner Elliott. Again, I would be very happy to take this into a further discussion in a professional development setting. I'm happy to do that, but it's a great question. I hope that helped.
Commissioner Powell. We can't hear you.
Sorry, forgot to unmute. So Carlene, it's fair to say that when we had a contingency in our budget, it was essentially giving permission for the district to overspend by that amount.
I think that to be politically correct, people became accustomed to the fact that they could go to central office and say, I'm sorry, I overspent my account. Can you fund me the difference? I think that's a fair statement to make. We have had the discussion now at Cabinet that practice will not continue. But buildings will be held accountable for what they placed in their budgets as far as the required dollar amount that they said that they needed. And there is no going back into central office to say, I goofed, I overspent, I need some money. We're going to have to figure it out amongst ourselves before money flows from the central office into the buildings.
Carlene, I just want to clarify the amount for the, it's growing to 23 million, 23.4 that you shared earlier. And just to clarify, because this board has had this discussion multiple times around that funding, and in this context and in this meeting, we're talking about transportation. So we have not paid those contracts. We have not gotten a clear answer from the state whether we pay it and then we're reimbursed. And I know that there's a lot of conversations and legals involved as well. So I want to put that out there because it's going to have an impact whether it's this year or next year in terms of what we get reimbursed. So it's not money that the district has and that we can really touch in any capacity. So if we pay those contracts this year, we will see a reduction next year in reimbursement from that. So we are still having that money, but we have to hold that money specifically to address where we will be now and a year from now with transportation. So I just want to be clear so that people understand it's not that we have this deficit and we're in a financial crisis and we're just holding on to $23 million because we want to hold on to it. We don't. We're just in this situation primarily because of COVID as well.
Commissioner LeBron is absolutely 100% correct, because the trade-off here is if we do not pay these contracts and it's decided that we do not pay, what will happen is that our transportation aid will be reduced next year. And so if we do pay it, yes, we will get the transportation aid, but at the same time, we will not be receiving dollar for dollar. So Dr. Jallo has been very wonderful in actually aligning me with an individual that I can actually speak to and work through some scenarios with regard to this to see how we will best end up with the scenarios we can present and have available in front of us. So there's more work to be done on that. But yes, as Commissioner LeBron is saying, it's not free and clear money, and we need to decide how we can best utilize that to maximize the dollars for our CSD.
Commissioner Elliott?
So is COVID causing this situation, Carlene?
It's interesting. In fact, when you take a look at the cash flow, right at this particular point in time, because please understand, we don't know the expenditures yet to come. We don't know what is looming out there for us that we will have to pay with regard to PPE, the personal equipment, protection equipment. We have an idea, but we don't know, we don't have an absolute dollar amount that we can tie to it. But where you will see the difference is in that cash flow that we just reviewed. If you start looking at the month starting in March where COVID hit us, reduced, and that's because we weren't paying necessary full salaries. We weren't paying contracts that weren't rendering services to the district. So in that regard, it actually worked out to the betterment of the financial position. But the worst is yet to come when the actual expenditures become known. But that's a great question. Great question. More to come on that.
For clarification, Commissioner Elliott, did you mean did COVID cause the issue with transportation or?
The delay in the payment, I guess, is what I'm.
Then yes, the answer,
Okay.
my understanding is yes, it's directly related to COVID, which is why we're just holding on to it because we're going to be impacted.
We're holding on to it because we may not get the reimbursable amount. Is that why we're holding? Because the state is not clear about their financial position due to COVID?
We're holding on to it because we didn't initially have clarity that if we paid for a service in terms of transportation, which is reimbursable to us by the state, whether we were allowed to do that because we're not getting that service because schools were shut down. But there has been a lot of advocacy and Carl has presented some of that information to us here in other public board meetings. This is just my understanding that even the transportation has done a lot of advocacy across all school districts to get paid. So it is not a unique situation to the Rochester City School District with transportation. I don't even think it's a unique situation to the state of New York. I think this has come up with other school boards across the United States in terms of what to do with those transportation contracts. But for us, it has an impact both this year and next year.
So next year has an impact because of the reimbursement rate? Is that the reason for the issue for next? Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So we're still waiting.
I'm hearing what you all are saying, so I may have some more questions offline.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else before Carlene goes on to the next subject at hand? Okay, Carlene.
Carlene, did you want without RAN or with RAN first?
We're going to do without the RAN first.
Okay.
Okay. So as you remembered, a resolution was brought before you to approve a RAN not to exceed $100 million. And so we're in the final stages now of getting that RAN ready to go out to bid. And the amount that actually will be sought in the bid will be $85,615,000 to be exact. And that will actually, this process will start this week with getting that out to bid. And I wanted just to share with you the importance, if you will, at this time regarding the RAN. So again, I apologize, these numbers are tiny. They're even tiny for me to read, but it's important to get a snapshot of the entire year. So if you could please go over to the column that says week ending February 19th. Do you see it up there? Okay. So right there, if we were to go according to our cash flow as it's been running, and we say that we will actually be receiving a 3% reduction in state aid, so a 3% reduction in our revenue for that week ending, which will be the worst week ending in our next financial year, you'll see that we'll be in a deficit position of $82 million. And that's again, keeping expenditures constant. That means salaries, that means health insurance, that means all contracts that we know of at this time. But that's a pretty dire looking position to be in. If you can flip it now forward, Kalia. When we add the RAN amount into the cash flow, and again, please understand, I'm not an advocate for debt, but this is where sometimes you need to do what is a little uncomfortable just to help you through. At that particular time when we ran this back on the 15th, we had used a dollar amount here. So when you go to the month of August for the coming year, you will see that that is where we put in a hypothetical 85 million into the cash flow. So then when you actually go back over to that week ending February 19th, we will just be getting by on 3.1 million. So again, this stresses the need as to why we need to discipline our spending. We need to make changes here because yes, the RAN will help us tremendously, but 3.5 million that we can just hang our hats and say we're good. Again, this is looking at a scenario of a 3% reduction. It could be more than that. It could be less than that. But I just decided to use that amount to say, let's pick the middle of the road and say, hypothetically, what would it look like? What would our cash flow position look like should we experience that reduction in state aid? So does anyone have any questions with regard to that? The RAN, if you go all the way over, Callie, I'm sorry, if you go all the way over to the far right-hand side of that document, the RAN will actually mature on June 30th, 2021. So again, we have to be ready to pay it back in full on that date.
Carlene, Commissioner Powell has her hand raised. She has a question.
Yes.
Carlene, my concern about using RAN bond dollars to close a projected state aid reduction is how do we justify a revenue anticipation note if what we're really anticipating is a reduction in aid?
And that's an excellent question. And again, all we can do is say, let's take a look at the variables that we know we have before us right now and try to make the most sense out of them that we can and move forward with our best effort. So I am not, as I stated, I am not, and I know that Dr. Myers-Small and I'm sure same is true for Dr. Nelms, not a proponent of entering into debt to get out of debt. Again, if you take a look at your own personal budget, that's not a way to manage that. We have to get to a point where we are totally, completely unreliant upon RANs. We have to get to a point where we have a sound fiscal foundation so that we do not have to go out to borrow the way that we've been borrowing. And especially at the increase, we were at 50 million last year and we had requested 100 million this year. It came back that we qualified for 85 million. So we need to get beyond that.
Commissioner Vice President Elliott.
Thank you. So Carlene, when do we have to pay the RAN back?
June, so it'll be in a year, 1 year from now.
So we have to take into consideration how that is going to impact our expenditures, correct? So we're going to have to reduce our expenditures at least by that 85 million, correct?
We have to reduce our expenditures to a point where our existing revenues will be able to cover our expenditures.
Is that doable?
I'm going to try with all my might, and I know everyone else is buying into it. I know that the next item up is a process, a method that Dr. Myers-Small supports and putting into place. And so that's where we're going to talk about placing freezes, if you will, on our budget codes, certain budget codes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I think Commissioner Powell raised her hand again.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Clearly, if we don't have reduction in state aid, we can repay it immediately. But I do have a question about what you just said, Carlene, about qualifying for 85 million. What conditions are there that dictate what we're qualified to borrow?
Actually, Carlene, can I just point out that this is an executive item discussion, and I don't want to overstep Carl's. Carl, so I just want to put that out there. I don't know how you can answer.
The thing is, if there's a formula,
I know, but
if there's a formula, it's not a secret. If it's not a formula, then I'm happy to defer. So if she could just answer Is there a formula or is there not?
There is a formula, and I can't pretend that I know it off the top of my head. Commissioner Powell, I will have that for you. It's a percentage of the month with the greatest need in cash flow is how it's calculated. And so as I understand it to be, if I'm understanding the formula correctly, through the fiscal advisor, we did not need 100 million. If that helps, okay? So again, the resolution was appropriately approved at up to 100 million. Any other questions?
No. Let me just go back and check. I just want to share with the board, though, that this is an executive discussion topic that Carl has asked to discuss for us to get legal counsel around, because I think there is more to why we qualified at 85 million and not just a formula. So I just want to put it out there, and I don't want to break executive session information, but I also don't want the public to have a different perspective on it either. So when we get more clarity around it, certainly we can come back and share that at the next finance meeting. Are you ready to present to the next topic? Anybody else has any questions related to this at this point? All right, we're gonna move on to the next topic.
As you will see within the agenda itself, there are a list of items that are going to be taken into consideration immediately with regard to, again, practicing our discipline of frugal spending. So with the, under the direction of Dr. Meyer-Small, what we will be doing is taking a look at out-of-town travel to restrict that. We will also be looking at, and again, forgive me for reading this to you, I just want to make sure everybody else has a copy of it, but non-grant, non-health safety-related equipment purchases and rentals, non-grant, non-health safety-related purchases of certain supplies and materials. We're going to be taking a look at controlling our overtime utilization and to put a freeze on the creation of new positions that were not included within the 2021 budget. With regard to certain supplies and materials, that list would include office supplies. It could include non-contractual uniforms. It could include shop supplies, tools, and those types of items. And again, this is all with the understanding that it's not any item that's placed under a grant or any item that's going to impede in any way the health and safety of our employees or our children. This is a list that is just a snapshot of a small portion of the list. There's going to be more that will be added to the list. And again, depending on how individuals react to this and how we discipline ourselves, we will expand the list accordingly. The other item that it should have been included in here, as I stated underneath the fund balance presentation, is that we do have to properly utilize our substitutes within the district. And I know Maurice Snipe is going to be reporting out on that in a little bit. So with regard to the budget freeze, do you have any questions on those items?
Hold on, I'm checking to see if hands are raised on that. Commissioner Shepard?
Yes, I wanted to know if we will have a list of all of the things that you would deem outside of like health, safety, or important purchases for equipment. Sorry, I just lost my screen. Because I am nervous about the fact that if sports and extracurricular activities are up and running again, I know fall, it might look a little different. But starting in January, if something like that, if they are coming back to the forefront, I want to make sure that everything that needs to be purchased for our students is able to be purchased and that this doesn't impact that.
Yes, and so that's why there's a caveat that has been placed upon each of these items, and so that it gives Dr. Myers-Small the leeway that if she deems an expenditure to be absolutely necessary, she may move forward with that expenditure. To your point, we don't exactly know what's going to be happening with our sports program coming up, but there is no way that we want to take away from our children and what they have available to them. We've tried to preserve program, and that's why you're not going to see where any of these items are, there's a freeze right now placed against any instructional aspects of our program. Any other questions?
Yes, I see Dr. Myers-Small has raised her hand.
Sure, thank you. Carlene, thank you for that. I just wanted to piggyback on what Carlene just shared. This is a shift for us in the district, and I'm just respectfully asking the commissioners to move forward, because to Vice President Elliott's point, we say that we're going to do things and then the action planning behind it doesn't always get followed up. So I would just ask that if you do hear grumblings, complaints, please refer those back to myself or Carlene, and we will circle back to make sure that there is clarity. But I have shared over and over again, we still are not out of a budget crunch, and that we have to be very mindful of every single kind of all of our fiscal activity. And there are things that we know that we haven't even seen yet or has been communicated to us yet. So we're trying to do this in ways, honestly, that stay as far away from the classroom. I respect and honor that. We know that we also will have some other items that will come up, similar to what Commissioner Shepard shared. If athletics do come up and running, there, we might have to have particular PPE for, contact sports or things of that nature. So we know that that is a potential for us. But if you hear grumblings or people are saying that they're not happy with the process, we want to make sure that we have open communication and we're clearly articulating the reasoning behind it, that it's not arbitrary and capricious, but we really need to move forward in this direction. So thank you, Carlene. Thank you, Commissioner LeBron.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions on this?
One thing, Commissioner LeBron, I did want to add, because I know it's way down in the small print on the agenda, is that a specific area of review, if you will, that we'll be going through at the August meeting will be the P-card transactions. We will have a presentation at the August meeting on P-cards, because that is an area of concern for us as well.
Yeah, so let me just say I was, and I apologize, Carlene, so we had our pre-finance meeting and I was prepared to come in today and give you guys a lot of information, and we are still giving you a lot of information today, but I am not in a good personal space today. And so I had to change the agenda a little bit. So I apologize to you guys for the last minute changes. What I will share though is to my colleagues and to the community is that, in our last previews meeting, we have been very, I guess, analytical and thoughtful into how this finance meeting should be moving forward in the best interest of the board, administration, and the community in terms of understanding what finance means to the school district and what it means to us as commissioners and how we make decisions. So you've heard Colleen mention that we're going to start doing trainings on the different funding lines, that she's going to be preparing a different presentation and a training on different topics moving forward each month. That'll give us an opportunity to have PD. She mentioned a survey. Certainly we want to get feedback from all of the commissioners on topics that are important to them or that they would like more training or information for all of us to collectively know. So I will share more at the next August meeting around that. I just want to share that little bit now so that you have some clarity, because Carlene has mentioned some things back and forth and I didn't take the time at the beginning of this meeting to share those things, but I appreciate that she's mentioning them to you guys. So next month there will be a training and a presentation on P cards, which I think, except for Commissioner Adams and maybe Commissioner Malloy, for at least certainly for the last 2 years, the rest of us have understood the issues around P cards as they have come up frequently in different audit reports and external and internal. So I'm going to stop with that. And then there are reports that will be also added both quarterly and or every other month, depending on the report. And Carlene will mention those when she starts presenting on those as well.
Absolutely. So to move forward, I have one last item this evening. This was a directive, your directive to us for a deliverable for an upcoming meeting. We were able to meet that deliverable for this meeting, and that is to take a look at the charter school reconciliation. And again, I apologize because the slide coming up is going to look like little ants running across the page. It's so tiny. But it was in an effort to get to you all of the historical data going back to 2013-14. And this is regarding, again, charter school enrollment. So what you have across the top of the page is going to be each one of the charter schools as they stand today, to show by year each of the 6 times that we pay the charter schools, that we reimburse them for the students that are in those columns underneath each of those individual charter schools. On the very right-hand side, you're going to have a column that represents obviously the total students, so the impact there to RCSD from an enrollment standpoint. The next column over is the per pupil rate as approved by New York State. And then you have finally the total payment made to all charter schools in aggregate. So again, because this is a report that you have asked for, it will be presented every other month throughout the course of the year. And by payment period, you will see how much has been paid out to each of the schools in aggregate. My question to you this evening will be to, if you could think about it, how you would like to see this data presented to you in the future. If it's more on the reconciliation between departments, how numbers are justified and presented to the finance team for approval. Happy to go into that again in another PD session. If you have any other questions that come up, just please feel free to submit them, because a tool is only as good as we create it for you. If it's not working for you, it's not working for us either, because it causes confusion and, again, a lack of transparency. We want to make sure that you have all the facts that you need to speak to the public when asked. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to entertain those. I do have one other factor, though, to mention, and that ties back into the $1.5 million projected shortfall in this area. When we did a trend analysis, again, year over year, of how many students actually end up being enrolled within a charter school in a given year, it looks like so that we would break even and not experience that $1.5 million shortfall, we would not be able to exceed 6,500 scholars or students being enrolled in charter schools this year. If we go above 6,500, we will be again in a deficit position, and that means we'll have to look within our collective overall district budget to find those funds to make up the difference. So again, if you have any questions, I am happy to take those.
Yes, I see lots of hands raised, so I'm going to go in the order I see them. So I have Commissioner Powell first, Vice President Elliott after her, President White after Commissioner Elliott, and then Commissioner Shepard.
Yeah, Carlene, on your table, under True North and the year 2017-18, the number, the total number in reconciled column, rather than being bold blue, was a bold red. Can you explain that? Is there a reason for the color coding?
Yeah, there was, I want to make sure that I have this in here. There's actually a bullet point down further on the sheet, Commissioner Powell, and it talks about the numbers they weren't available at that point in time, And so when they weren't available, we couldn't pay out, so an adjustment needed to be made. And so with regard to the number up there, the 763, I will get back to you on that, but I'm thinking it's related to that same bullet point that the numbers needed to be and were challenged at that point in time. But I will go back and make sure I have an absolute answer for you, that my understanding is correct.
Okay, Commissioner Vice President Elliott.
Yes, thank you. This area around charter school expenditures, and this question is more to the superintendent, is an area I believe that we could, if we can rebrand ourselves, if you will, and if we are able to provide results, I believe that this is an area that we can reduce expenditures because we'll be able to compete with those charter schools. We never looked at, in my opinion, we never looked at the district from a business model. And I think that that's important that we do that because here is an opportunity, if there's any room for to reduce the expenditures in the charter school area is an area which in turn also will reduce transportation costs. So I'm hoping, Madam Superintendent, that our programs will be so good and we'll be offering all these AP courses and we will be loving on our children that our parents would be willing to improve the Rochester City School District as opposed to walking with their feet to charter schools. We often have believed that because our families are poor, many of them, that they don't have decision-making capacity to make the right choice for their children. And I think that's where we were naive and disrespectful to our families. So I'm believing that if we can change this, rebrand the Rochester City School District, that it is a great school. And my vision is that it's the number one school in the world, number one school district in the world. So if we can rebrand ourselves, I think there's an opportunity for us to save some dollars in that particular line as well as in the transportation. Do we also provide them with food? Do we provide the charter schools with food? Is there a food cost there? Okay, if it's not, all right, so thank you.
Vice President Elliott, if you don't mind, I'd like to just piggyback on that. That's what I have been sharing in some of the community presentations to the Rotary and other groups, that branding is really important, that Rochester City School District for too long has had significant negative connotation and people roll their eyes when they hear about our district. Especially when we think about our academics. So branding is an area of focus for me, and it needs to be meaningful branding. So we start small and we capitalize on the areas where we do have success, where we are doing well. And I think just the great example is attending all of those commencement ceremonies and hearing all of the amazing activities, academic opportunities that our students participated in and where they were going. And so that is my key. I can't control folks applying for charter schools. I have to fortify what I'm doing, what we are doing in the Rochester City School District. So I wholeheartedly co-sign that sentiment.
Thank you.
President White.
Yeah, to steal Dr. Jallo's phrase, what's the takeaway, Carlene, from this? And more specifically, are there charter schools that are retaining dollars that they shouldn't be retaining because their enrollment is dropped? Are we in a position to monitor and manage the number of students that are there, the number of students that come back, and how much we should be getting back, if anything at all? Or is there any takeaway in that area?
Yes, and I appreciate you asking that question. That was one of the first questions that I had is how are we tracking this? And that is not absolutely done entirely and completely within the finance department. There's a shared responsibility, I believe, between the Department of Accountability as well as finance. So we take the numbers in that have been verified by the Department of Accountability, and then we process those, that enrollment for the absolute payment. So it's two different departments looking at it. can it be improved? I think anything and everything can always be improved. So we will look for ways of improving upon it, and just even understanding the calculation of the rate allowed. It is absolutely so critical that we understand and we perform that calculation when we are setting up our budget. So the takeaway is that we have more to learn, and we promise you we will get it done, and we promise you an accurate number as we move forward, the best of our ability to do so.
Commissioner LeBron, just a quick follow-up question. There is the non-financial aspect of what's happening with our charter schools. There have been a number of reports, some scientifically based, some anecdotal, that suggest that strategically some of these charter schools are purposely moving students back and forth based on the difficulty or the degree of difficulty that they have with those students. This is more directed to Superintendent Myers-Smalls. We probably need to get a handle on that too, because if that's in fact what they're doing, it's not only unfair to the district, but most importantly, it's unfair and inequitable to the student population that they're doing it to. And I think the evidence goes beyond the anecdotal. I think there is some empirical assessments that suggest that this is exactly what they're doing. And if we don't do it for our own district, we should clearly step up and protect these children. So I don't know, I know that accountability, that sounds like something that's in their bailiwick or in their silo, but someone should be, and I realize it's probably not the district's greatest priority, but someone should be looking at that, because those students are very transient. They're not getting the instruction that they need. They're being abused and mistreated. And somebody, perhaps it should be the State Department of Education, but these are our children, so we can't shovel it off and say, well, let's let Dr. Jallo and the commissioner and other people look at it. It's a serious issue, and more than somebody needs to do something about it.
Can I add something to that, President White? Please know that the Office of the State Comptroller also audits the charter schools as they do with public schools. It's all within that same bucket. So I hope that you can find some assurance in that it is being reviewed and audited.
Yeah, and I just want to add too that is one of the reports that's going to start coming to the board every other month in terms of those numbers and the enrollment. So that we can certainly start having an understanding of how that movement may or may not be happening with actual evidence and enrollment numbers. And if we see obviously a jump or a decrease, a large decrease in numbers from a specific school, certainly that's the board's opportunity to have that red flag to then ask for further information and start digging deeper into it. But this is one of those reports that the auditor specifically kind of mentioned for this board to start having eyes on, because certainly it existed internally for people to know and understand between finance and accounting, but not for the board. And so we will start seeing that report every other month in finance. Commissioner Shepard?
This conversation made me think about something that I haven't thought about in the past. So the charter school tuition is based on per pupil for total numbers and not for percentages. And I was wondering, has there been discussion at the state in regards to, as our budget fluctuates with potentially losing funding from the state, how will that impact charter? So they will continue to fund per pupil at the same level, but we may have to decrease based on the different revenue streams that come into the district. So I was curious to know, had that been a conversation at the state to say, you know, our breaking point right now is 6,500 students, but that's at the level at what they're already and have been previously getting paid for. So I was wondering if that is a conversation happening at the state, that their tuition rates would be adjusted based off of how the state adjusts our overall revenue to aid.
You go back to that report with all the little numbers on it, you'll actually see that for 2021, Commissioner Shepard, that the state did reduce the allocation slightly. So if you want to take a look right down there in the bottom, so the second column over from the right-hand side, it went from $13,995 down to $13,785 per student. So the state is trying, I think, at least in the way I'm interpreting it, is that they're trying to bring it into alignment so that if we get a reduction in aid, the charter schools will be accountable as well, and they will be reduced in aid in the same way.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Because I know that there'll be also rolling reductions potentially too. So I want to make sure that that's continually being put on the table as well.
Okay, I think that wraps up this section, but we still have one or two more things to go through. So I wasn't sure if Maurice is presenting next. Is Maurice? All right, Maurice, you're up on substitute teachers.
Oh, thank you very much, Commissioner LeBron. Good evening, commissioners, superintendents, cabinet members, and state monitor. And I will share an update on our substitute and temporary services program. I'm filling in for Chief Harry Kennedy. I am pleased to report that he is feeling much better right now. And I guess I would ask Kalia to help me with the presentation. So this will be an overview and an update. And if we can go to the next slide, please, Kalia. So I do want to share the current state of our per diem program, going back to, say, the beginning of our last school year, and TETS, which is our temporary employment services programs. And I'll be sharing a good bit of cost and usage on both of these. Next slide, please. Give a little background. Next slide. So this chart, I think, is very key. As you look at what our current costs are at for all three programs, that 12.5 at the bottom, 12,555,000 is our spend this year for the teacher subs, administrative subs, and also our building per diem subs. The last year line was number, and you could see the year before that it had started climbing as well. So this chart shares that we have made a big difference just year over year, and really curbing that cost, because this cost was really out of control. And we were looking at it going up to 18 million if we didn't put some controls in place and really try to arrest this cost that was just going up for all of our sub programs. So the good news is that we have reduced it a good bit this year, and our goal is going to be to continue the efforts we've begun this past year to reduce this cost. But a lot of good work went on in the last year, and I want to give credit to our school chiefs for partnering with us to really make a lot of this happen. Next slide, please. The vast majority of that 17 million spend is in teacher sub program, 94%. So that's where we really need to put all of our focus, or most of our focus. I would also share, though, with the admin sub, while the cost is much lower, we really did a significant job reducing that cost, and I'll share that in some later slides. The 891 million for our building subs, that's pretty across the board. It won't change a lot year to year. Contractually, we provide 25 building subs for the district, and they all make about the same amount based on our pay structure for subs. So that is sort of static, but our work has really been in the first two buckets, and mainly in the teacher sub bucket. Next slide, please. So here's the real reason we have a lot of vacancies. 45%, or 7.3 million of that 16 million spend is because we've been filling vacancies. Harry mentioned here true ups. This is going to be critical to us managing this cost going forward. We need to eliminate any unnecessary vacancies in our buildings. And of course, trying to get these true ups at the right times in the business, certainly at the beginning of the school year, because enrollment changes and other things happen. But we're going to do a much better job this coming year in trying to manage rather our true ups, so we can have vacancies that are real and not spend money on vacancies that might be questionable, I would say. So that's one of the important things that Carlene and I and some of the budget staff have talked about, certainly with the school chiefs. But we're going to all partner to see if we can really do some good true up to only use the substitutes we need to use, that they're in valid bona fide positions in front of our students, and making sure that we don't have positions in there that aren't really true vacancies. Next slide, please. So here's what we did starting last November with Superintendent Dade was in place. We implemented a number of countermeasures, and this was really to hold buildings accountable, to do a better job in HR. And the superintendent at that time made it clear that HR, school chiefs, and building principals, that we really needed to focus on that. Again, the costs were going sky high, and if we had not done something, instead of 17 million, we probably would have been looking, like I said, the projection on the trend line was going up to 18. So the fact that we came in, about 12.5 million shows that we really did make a big difference. And again, I do want to thank the school chiefs, because their leadership was really a big key to us curbing these costs. Next slide. So we went out to all of the schools. We put together protocols and guidelines. We met with school chiefs on several occasions. We met with principals. We met with all the school secretaries and had specific things for them as well. And so we put together some things that would help principals. We have several HR directors who are focused on the schools, and they would assist attendance across the board. If there were individuals that we needed to make some corrections to, or help them, to reduce patterns of poor attendance that really was getting out of control. We provided that kind of support and guidance. And in some cases, it's requiring a doctor's note. It's something we call a CPI, or a certified absence note from the doctor. But there are cases where we employed those. Also, we asked the principals to look at patterns, look at the Friday, Monday patterns, and also set maybe guidelines as to how many people you can really afford to have off on a given day. And these were some things that we've kind of reinforced again, that again helped us sort of manage our costs in the right direction. Next slide, please, Gary. So true ups and vacancies was one of the big pieces in trying to get the ratios and projections, to what they should be. The process guidelines and administrative sub-use, we put new ones in place. In order for a building to get an administrative sub, it had to go through an approval process, and it had to be approved by the school chief in order to do that. And again, we had great success in reducing that cost, and you'll see that in a couple of slides coming up. We removed generic IDs. This was something that was put in place several years ago for when we would have grant-funded positions that might not be a position that, for a teacher. And so we could use this generic ID to accommodate that within our, sub-smart find system. However, we found that system was not, was being used for things inappropriately. And so because of the tough position we were in last fall, we just stopped using them. I know it created a little bit of shock to the system, but we just said we can no longer use them because we couldn't manage it as it should have been managed. The monitoring and inspection by HR, looking at a lot of the per diem subs and then working with the buildings with something else, we ratcheted up. So the current state, again, as a result of these countermeasures we implemented, we have gotten some control of our spend. Obviously, the work has to continue, but we have seen some progress, and we'll share that in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So if we look at this next slide, this slide shows the costs we have, for our temporary services. What you see is, these are temporary services mainly for paraprofessionals, lunchroom aides, clericals, etc. That cost started going up in September. October was at a high. And you can see starting in November, we started to make some differences in this cost. Significant difference. I'm sorry, this is not the test. This is really the administrative piece that I said we made a significant dent in. And with this particular data set, you can see the shift. In fact, it's a cliff from October to November. We really just said, hey, we cannot continue to do it. We're going to monitor the number of extra admins we really need in the building. And you can see the total cost there of $187, about $188,000. And just for comparison purposes, the spend on that same line the year before was $644,000. So to go from that to 188 was a significant decrease. And compared to the budget of this past year, the budget was $510,000. So we really did a yeoman's job in really reducing that particular cost. And again, a lot of credit goes to our school chiefs, particularly for this improvement. Next line. So the key message, administrative per diem usage dropped off from a high of 56, you saw, down to an average low of 10.5. And of course, since we implemented the changes, the process, and looking at COVID-19, we did have a little bit of a spike in January. And this was due to, we had some layoffs in January, as you recall, and there was a lot of movement, subsequent movement within our school buildings as a result of layoffs. You have people that move from building to building, and we allowed some of the subs to come in to really help for a few days through that transition of teacher movement. And so that created a little bit of spike in January, but we got things back under control after that. Next slide. So now I'll speak to the teacher per diem substitute usage. Next slide, Kelly. So here with the teachers' numbers, you can kind of discount July and August. So things really start in earnest in September. And you can see the spend gets to be over $1 million per month. September, then you look at October. We began making changes, and it's a lot more difficult with the teacher ranks trying to make the cost reductions, but we started making them. You can see November, December, about 1.2 million. January, again, a little bit of a spike, as we mentioned. But then February came down very good, shorter month too, we would add. And then, as you can see with March, COVID started really the middle of March. And so we got some benefit there because if I were to tell you what we had the cost the year before was actually 1.8 million. So this March number, while it is 1.2, year over year, significant change. And then we really started to see COVID savings more April, May, and June. And you can see a good bit of costs coming down when we were averaging about 1.2 million for those previous months. So this chart does tell us a lot about our cost. Costs still higher than we want. The COVID projections, I estimate to have benefited us of probably around 2 million. All of the other work that HR and school chiefs supported, that was probably about 2 million. So yeah, we reduced costs a total of about 4 million or so, but it took a lot of effort and no one could have predicted COVID, but obviously we didn't need as many subs those last few months, and that helped to offset some of our costs. Next slide. So key messages from that, we went from a high of 1.7 million in October down to, as I said, an average low of around 1 million. And still, we plan to kind of keep that momentum up for next year and hopefully setting ourselves up. We still know things are still to be determined in terms of our numbers and our staffing group working with our school chiefs and supervision now to say, you know, what's staffing going to look like. But from the sub perspective that Harry and I are working with, we are definitely going to continue the work we've started. Next slide. So now we'll talk about the temporary services. So with our temp services, the total spend, if you just shift to the bottom right, it's a little over $3 million total. You can see most of that, 2/3 of that is really from the use of paraprofessionals. And the next slide shows, you can go back to that. The dotted line, the dotted green line shows the para cost. And you could see again with November, the red line we show when we started making changes, the trend does start to go down. The solid line there is really for our clerical support, and that cost really peaked kind of in September, and then it trended down as well as we moved throughout the year. And that bottom dashed green line, that was really for a small group called technicals. IM&T they do use some temporary help in their shop, but that's not a big cost driver. So again, trying to manage these costs, and we'll continue to try to reduce those costs over the next school year as well. So some of the key messages here. Our total spend in October was at a high of about 515,000. Subsequent months, as you saw from the previous chart, certainly trended down. I think we certainly were able to manage our costs a lot better since November. And I think overall, when you look at the data, particularly year over year, we were able to reduce costs, stay close to what was budgeted for this year. And again, we want to talk about how can we do more to curb costs going forward. And that's what we'll share in the next slide. So our go forward recommendations. Currently, the per diem substitute budget is centralized. That means the budget department, provides a lot of the data. It's managed by HR. However, the substitutes are controlled by the building. So this is the current state. We would like to recommend a change to this current process. Next slide, please, Kelly. We would like to decentralize it. I know finance with Colleen and our budget team, we've been discussing that. We would prefer to provide each building with a predetermined spend, and it would be based on, their use, based on historical data, but also based on their projections for next school year. And then if that cost is exhausted, then the buildings would have to work with their leadership to determine how they will offset the cost. We just want to bring more accountability to this system, because we did realize, and you can see from those previous years, we were really going out of control in terms of controlling our sub spending. But there'll be a lot more work on this. We would also recommend that we would have a quarterly inspection and really a budget meeting. That budget would facilitate. HR would be at the table, school chiefs would be at the table, and building principals. And we would, again, this would allow us to identify trends earlier. If something happens to a building, or they should have maybe more people out, there are more people who are out either for injury or illness, or could be childbearing. At least we can now anticipate and then make, the right kind of cost moves that'll keep us to managing the budget in the way we think it should be managed. So these are some things that we definitely would like to see going forward, and we would propose we move in this direction. Next slide. As far as our audit, we do have an audit that we've been working on, and we thank the Auditor General's Department working with us. I don't have a lot to share on that, and I know time is not on our side. But our next slide, Callie. So we have completed 3 of the 9 recommendations, and we are working on the other 6. We would prepare to have more to share on that at a future meeting. And Anissa has really been working with us on completing all of the things that were identified in the audit. So that completes my presentation. I'll be glad to entertain questions, Commissioner LeBron.
Yeah, there's a couple of hands raised. Commissioner Shepard.
So I have a few questions that are linked, and then I have an additional question that's separate. So I asked the few questions that are linked, and then you can kind of fold it all into one answer. So I know that I saw that there were expenditures for substitutes during months that we were not open due to COVID physically. And so what were subs doing during that time, and what did it actually look like for them? And then what financial impact did that have was there a financial impact with having to train subs with technology skills? Was that a part of the number, the financial number you gave us? Did subs have to be trained on during the COVID months?
Yeah, not a training cost. The cost to us is really just the cost of salaries for the sub. We have a number of subs that are in positions that have been there all year. That's part of that vacancy number I shared. That was a very high 45%. And so that's the large bulk of those substitutes. It wasn't 100% of them, but there are significant numbers when you look at the total subs we use, and to have 45% that are in positions that they have been all year. And so COVID didn't change the bulk of that cost, but we were able to move people who were not, the day-to-day subs was the ones that we were able to move back and move off, and encourage that through our monitoring to get those last 3 months savings that you see. It went from 1.2 million on average to say 800,000. And then the last month was about 500,000+.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then what impact for next year, depending on which route we actually take? I know that that teachers and staff have had a concern about even returning to school, and so if we were to physically open, what impact will that have on, is that a projected number? Have you guys taken that into account for next year in regards to these numbers you gave us around subs? If teachers don't return because of that, have you guys taken that into account with these numbers?
Commissioner Shepherd, a great question. I must say I don't have answers to that one, but it is going to be based a lot on the projections and then who comes back and at what percentages. It could mean we may have a need for more subs, potentially. Obviously, we'll have to see what our numbers really look like. And then we will have to adjust. Right now, it's very fluid, and we've just been going through another reduction we just completed, and then there was this movement of people who were dislocated, and so we're just settling a lot of that and working with cabinet and school chiefs to see how many positions in each school as we go forward. So I'm afraid I couldn't answer that, but it's something we're going to be working on daily.
Okay.
Shepherd, we just continue to look at that. We're heading towards working on finalizing plans for submission. But just as you said, the COVID-19 reopening plans are constantly evolving, and we're working with all of the unions to just look at what would be involved with all substitutes. So that is on our radar screen. I don't want you to think that we're not thinking about it. Long story short.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then the last thing that I guess this is more of a comment or statement or my opinion in regards to the recommendation of decentralizing and putting more accountability in school buildings with subs. I do have a problem just off the top of my head with that because I'm thinking about principals and all the things that they already have to do. But then when I heard that if things are, I don't want to say getting out of hand, but if things go in a direction that they have to spend more on subs, that's something out of their control. I don't support that they would then have to figure out how to offset that in their costs. And I would like to hear more about how you guys came to that decision. Because I'm trying to understand what impact that will have on principals and the things that they already have to do in their budgets with decentralizing it. So I am nervous about that part.
Okay. I do understand that, and please know that this was just a recommendation at this time, just a recommendation. So we have a lot more work to do on that.
Yeah, no problem.
Commissioner Powell?
Yeah, my question is kind of along the same vein as what Commissioner Shepherd just said, in terms of potentially punishing schools in a decentralized plan for things out of their control. My first thought was, what if you subtracted out the substitutes that were filling long-term vacancies, either due to maternity or disability or other unpaid leaves. I'm sorry, paid or unpaid leaves of extended nature. And the second thought was, I wonder if we really do need, whether it would really be a benefit to, if in fact the elimination of that code, that generic code, has had a significant impact. Clearly, if a school has a Monday-Friday or a Friday-Monday issue that they need to pay attention to, they should be paying attention to it, whether they have to be held accountable in the budget for it or not, just from the standpoint of basic supervision. So I wonder if we hold principals to account for their personnel management, but not through the budget. Just some thoughts.
Yeah.
I think we lost.
What happened?
I don't know what happened. So I don't even see him on the call.
Yeah, I don't either.
So hopefully he'll join back and one of our Nicole or Kalia will let them back in. But I didn't know if Commissioner Powell, you had a question that would need to follow up. I know you gave some comments, but if you had a question.
It really was just a reaction to the proposal. And if some of those basic factors were delineated more thoroughly, such as, subtracting that 45% or so from what the principals are held accountable for. No, it wasn't really a question. It was more observation and comment.
Okay, I'm gonna go over to Commissioner Adams. And then if you have a question and we can't get them back on the line, we'll write it down and figure out a way to get some answers. I don't know what happened. Commissioner Adams?
So my concern is, what are we going to do different about getting some low risk substitutes, just to have enough staffing for when the school year begins? Because from what it sounded like, from what he just said, we just been operating using a whole lot of substitutes all year round, filling some vacancies that we got. And so I think that we got to do something different in order to get some different results, or we're going to end up spending just as much, if not more. Because I know for a fact some of the more high-risk subs, the older ones, ain't going to be willing to come up in here. They're not going to be willing to come up in there in September. And so we got to have a different plan just for us in order to have enough staffing when we start off in September, if we start off in September.
Anybody else? I have some comments that I wanted to follow up on. So in regards to long-term subs and regular subs and the cost, that was an item that we had discussed previously where with our former CFO, just to start separating those costs within our finance reports so that we can identify which ones are actually one-day subs versus long-term subs. And so I'll put a reminder on that for the next time. Substitute cost is another report that we will start reviewing in the Finance Committee. So again, that the board can have eyes on this and that we're regularly getting updates and tracking what we're spending and why we're spending it and what the costs are and the trend on those expenditures. In regards to both, I guess, what Commissioner Adams and Commissioner Shepard have mentioned in terms of substitutes, when we do open, I think we do have to have a separate, I would say, expenditure line around COVID and substitutes and regular substitute costs and figuring out how to have a report with the full total amount, but separating those two. I know for me, I personally would like to see what's driving an increase in subs and if it is COVID specifically related versus just everyday normal substitute needs. And then making sure that we also are prepared so that if a teacher tests positive, what that means. So I think this is more along the lines of school reopening. If a teacher tests positive, there has to be, will there be a sub and what those costs additional, so that would be. I'm going to put it out there that I centralizing this substitute process, primarily just because I'm in school and I'm learning more and more about this stuff, but in learning about it, I'm also looking at other school districts, and centralized versus shared costs and decentralized is something we've actually discussed over and over and over again. Not on the board, but in class. But what I will say is I would like to see eventually our principals have more autonomy over their actual budgets and needs in their schools. We operate in a very centralized model. And I do think that this is something that it could work two ways. One, it gives them some accountability but it also empowers them to make the decisions that are best for their school in a way that they probably have not been given the opportunity because of this centralized model that we operate. And so I would be interested to hear more about that. And before the decision is finalized, I personally would like to hear from principals around their thoughts around centralized or decentralized. And we should be training our principals to understand budgets and impacts of the budget and the decisions that they make from the total budget. So in any way that I can support around that, I will. So those are my thoughts on the recommendation for decentralizing that cost. And again, to the full board, we will be getting more reports moving forward in finance around substitutes so that we can also monitor that. Commissioner Vice President Elliott.
Yeah, just to add my thoughts to the conversation. I think it's going to be important that this board can take into consideration that those costs have to be controlled. And so and I can't remember what the budget line item is, but I just think that, how do you control that? Now, one of the things that I have witnessed with some folk is that if they get upset with folk, they go out on sick leave, So, and I don't know if you can really, control that part, because legally they probably, according to the contract, it is their right to do that. But I think that, there is benefits and costs, if you will, on both sides of this argument, that, this could be an area where we can control costs. And if you recall, part of what Maurice indicated in terms of the measures to reduce those costs had to do with centralizing the decision of hiring substitutes. So I'd just like for us to keep that part of the argument in mind as well.
Commissioners, my apologies. My computer went dead, but I am back in now. So
thank you. I just want to, Commissioner Elliott just mentioned that I understand, like most districts that have a centralized model, I think that is they're thinking that they have some control over the cost at a central location. That's essentially what a centralized model is. But for us, we have not had that history of having that outcome of controlling the cost for substitutes. In fact, it's been an area that has been brought up multiple times in terms of overspending in those areas at a centralized model. I think the benefit of a decentralized model, again, is that the accountability is on that school. And yeah, there are factors. I want to point out that Maurice, when he presented this, said that there would be data used and cost trend analysis used to determine the budget for each school. So it would be based on perhaps the last 3 years of their cost and averaging that out and figuring it out. But that then there would also be some centralized support if there were circumstances beyond the school or the principal's control. And certainly, I know what you're talking about, it happens in many other places too. People get upset and they take FMLA and they're out, and then we're stuck in two different difficult financial situations with that. So I think we should, as a board, continue to hear and explore these options, but I, again, would like to hear from principals around it too, and what would make them either supported or not supported, and how we can all work together around this, because I would support a decentralized substitute process with ensuring that our principals and our schools have the centralized supports needed for circumstances a number being driven with actual data and a cost analysis of their actual expenditures that they've used year after year. Commissioner Shepard and then Commissioner Powell.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick note because it was brought up. So will we be getting another presentation on this next month before school? Because as Commissioner LeBron just stated, that that it will be based off of previous years, but I know that the makeup of schools has drastically changed just because of all the movement. So I don't know if that will be a reliable number moving forward over the past 3 years, but I would like to know if we will be getting another presentation next month on this before school starts.
So not on substitutes. I think we have a schedule for that. And again, I apologize. I was prepared with some more information and dates for the full board, but next month in August, I will be prepared to give you guys when to expect which report on what month, and then which PD topics we're gonna have. And we're gonna send out the survey to you guys this week and calculate the results of the feedback you guys have provided us as well.
Okay.
Till August, and I will give you those dates, and you'll know exactly when to expect those reports moving forward.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Commissioner LeBron, if I may, I know when my computer went out, I think Commissioner Powell had a question. I just wanted to.
So she's, her hand is raised too, and so I'm gonna let her speak and then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maurice, mine was mostly a comment observation about kind of the pros and cons of the proposal to decentralize. And I'll let the minutes reflect that. But the reason I put my hand up a second time is this call is outlasting my power source. I'm going to have to log off, find a way to plug in, and then sign back in. Okay?
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Powell. So I think this concludes the entire, well, no, I was going to say the entire agenda, but I think there is something else on the agenda that Carlene might have had. No, actually, this is it, you guys, from my end. So that concludes the finance meeting. It is 7:28 p.m. I am going to close the meeting out, turn it over back to President White. President White, meeting's all yours.
Muted.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. I was saying well done. I think we weren't supposed to be done with that agenda until 7:45. So good job, Commissioner LeBron, and to our colleagues. The only thing left in the agenda is executive session. And we're going into executive session for a variety of reasons. And I'll need a motion to do that. But just so that you incorporate this into your motion, it relates to a personnel matter, the terms and conditions of a particular employee. It also relates to legal matters, and it also relates to contractual matters. Those, ladies and gentlemen listening, those contractual legal matters, as I indicated, I think at our last board meeting, we have the right, like anybody does, to meet privately with our attorney, and we'll do that when we go meet in the other virtual room. But we do have to announce, and I do have to have a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing the terms and conditions of a particular employee. Is there a motion?
Second.
I think I heard Commissioner LeBron. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Come on, guys. I heard Vice President Elliott. All those in favor of going to executive session for the purpose of discussing the terms and conditions of a particular employee indicate by keeping your video on and saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Seems that the ayes have it. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think, unless the clerk corrects me, we will have any business once we finish up an executive session. So I suggest that you go home, enjoy the weather, or not go home, but turn off the monitor and then enjoy the time you have with your family, because we are certainly going to do that once our executive session is over. God bless, and we'll see you at our next board meeting, which, Madam Clerk, when is our next meeting?
Our next meeting is on Thursday, but tomorrow we have another hearing for our state monitor.
That's right.
And this one is on fiscal matters. We'd like people to please sign up. So if you haven't done so, please email us to sign up to speak tomorrow.
I got to tell you, the other day I participated in a community forum, and there were 33 people that participated from beginning to end in that community forum. I was joined by our superintendent and Dr. Jallo as well. Dr. Jallo had an opportunity to talk about the upcoming forum. Again.
So the forum begins tomorrow from 5 to 6:30. If anyone's interested in signing up, please send an email to statemonitor@rcsdk12.org. You can also submit your comments in writing and they will be read into the public record. And we have a board meeting on Thursday, the 23rd.
Absolutely perfect. All right, I guess we'll see everybody on Thursday. If not Thursday, then certainly tomorrow. God bless, and on behalf of the board, we appreciate you watching and paying attention to what we're doing. All right, Tom, tell me when we're all set in executive session.